everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. I'm your host, Cameron English, joined as always by Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, so good to see you. What's going on?
Not a blessed thing. It's unfortunately, we're in default for sure now. I can see all these beginning to change, and I had to go dig out the sweaters. You don't have that problem, I understand.
We got one more 100-degree day left because we live in schizophrenic California. But it is going to cool down. It's really good, and it's not just because the weather's cold, but I get to take my kid to the park, and my son is at that age where jumping in leaves is the coolest thing in the world. Mm-hmm. So I get to do that, and there's music that I associate with the fall, and it just brings my spirits up. It's a great time. It's the best season.
Let me just ask this, because my remembrance of growing up in Los Angeles is that it was very tough to jump in the palm tree leaves. So, do you have to go to Home Depot to buy bags of fall leaves, or?
Here in the north, the Great White North of California, we've been blessed with some natural forests and lots of trees that aren't palm trees. So the trees fall, I scoop them up with the rake, or not the trees, the leaves, and then my son does the dive bomb into the snow angel, So it's a great time. We're making memories as he grows up really quickly. I'm very excited about it. Anyways, we've got a great story to talk about, and this is more topical than usual for you, Dr. Dinnerstein. Of course, there was this big Make America Healthy Again conference up on Capitol Hill this week that was hosted by Senator Ron Johnson, and fascinating in the different cast of characters that were up there. And so, Chuck, you're looking at this, and you're looking specifically at the conflicts of interest, because one of the things that all of these people in the alternative health space, or the preventative medicine space, whatever you want to call it, they always stress conflicts of interest, right? The FDA is owned by drug companies, and USDA is owned by food companies, and that's why everyone's fat and sick, is because there's people with nefarious interests that are driving the policy. So let me read the intro to your article and then take it away. So you write, Callie Means, co-founder of TrueMed, recently raised concerns about conflicts of interest within the FDA and the influence of corporate funding on public health guidelines. Thereby, he joined the ranks of RFK Jr. and his newfound friend, former President Trump, who argued for a, quote, special presidential commission of independent minds who are not bought and paid for by big pharma. I love where this is going, Chuck. Take it away.
Okay, well, as I mentioned before we got rolling, I have a real problem here. I think that RFK Jr. and Carrie Means, as with other blind squirrels, have found a nut, and they are holding onto it tenaciously. RFK comes with a huge amount of baggage, and it makes me pause, and it is very difficult to say that I think when it comes to making our regulatory science agencies more diverse, he has a point. I would also quickly add that he does not get a seat at the table, because he doesn't meet any of the criteria that would qualify him. So with that in mind, I took a look at a little segment that Carrie Means did, and he raised several questions about the corruption in our scientific guidelines, and he asked several questions, so I thought they were worth at least looking into. So the first question he asked was why 75% of the FDA drug approval program was funded by Big Pharma. So you can see right away that if Big Pharma is funding the FDA, they must be getting their way on all the drugs that they wish to foist off on the American public. Well, as I write, the short answer for reasons why Big Pharma funds the FDA is because it's required by law. It's a law that was passed by our Congress, and the reason that they passed it was better to make the corporations pay the bill than raise our taxes. Now, the truth of the matter is that we wind up paying for it anyway. We either pay through it their taxes, or we pay for it through a higher cost of drugs. But at least for as they say in the government world, the optics were better to get them to pay for it. And that's what they've done. And in exchange for paying for the FDA to do the regulatory review, they asked that the regulatory review be done in a little bit more quick and thorough manner. And that brought to them a very important thing. It brought to them consistency and a known program to get their drugs approved. So as a result of the FDA being funded by Big Pharma, the approval process time dropped by 19 months, by 2/3. And first-time approvals have gone up double. And in the same period of time, before we all say, well, they must be shoddy work, the amount of black box warnings that came out post-marketing have only gone up 3 or 4%. So funding the FDA with Big Pharma money seems to have worked out pretty well. His next question was, why are 95% of the FDA advisors taking money from food corporations? Again, a good question. And there, again, in showing my age, I went back to what I learned in medical school, which is Sutton's Law. And Sutton's Law is based on a 1930s bank robber, Willie Sutton, who was asked, why do you rob banks? And he said, that's where the money is. And the problem here is that the experts that can advise the FDA or the USDA are primarily funded by the government or by advocacy groups that have an interest in these products. Nobody wants to study olives. Big Olive needs to do that. So it's inevitable that when you bring together an expert committee, you will find that the expert committee has received funding either from corporate special interests or the government. And the question is not so much that this is where their funding comes from, but how well they treat their bias. So I looked into some of these things, and as I said, in order to be considered for these committees, you have to have 10 years of experience. You need an advanced degree in nutrition or health. You need expertise in a specific scientific area as demonstrated by peer review publications and presentations. So it's inevitable that the funding for these people will come from these agencies. And when you look at the agencies, there were a few that, you might be concerned about. There's the usual things that you would see, like the beef people and Mars representing candy, and the American Diabetic Association is in there, but also breastfeeding. So I don't know, I've never heard of big breastfeeding, but I guess, they're out hammering for their position too. So and they funded them, so nobody seems to get that upset if funding comes from there. In any case, I think that the real problem is not so much that we have these experts or not, but that we don't look for diversity of thought. And I think that when we talk about science, it would be far better to have diversity of thought on these committees rather than simply identify diversity by age, gender, or geographic locale.
I like the point that you made, that there is some truth. There's usually a kernel of truth, in fact, to a lot of the things that these I don't know what the right word is from, these iconoclasts, the people that like to tip over sacred cows. There's usually something correct. You can point to instances where the FDA was too hasty in approving a drug, or where there was true corruption, where you had corporations that were unduly influencing some regulatory or political process. I think the problem I have with what they're doing, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is that they're taking something that's typical of our system, the way it's set up, and they're turning it into this conspiracy that by default proves there's something evil going on, right? So the fact that the companies that are regulated by the FDA are involved in, the agency's activities, it's not horrifying in and of itself, right? And so I think that's my biggest problem is they go, there's some collaboration, and therefore that's the reason everyone's sick and fat and dying of cancer. So in other words, they've smoothed all the edges and all the nuance off the conversation, and then they feed that message or communicate that message to millions of people. and then you lose, right. The conversation's over at that point if that's the framing. What do you think?
Well, I think that's truly the case. I mean, they simplify the reality of the situation to the point that it makes a neat, simple argument that people can latch onto. I mean, nobody likes bureaucracy. Certainly, given what's gone on with the pandemic, there's been a lot of criticism of our public health system. And so it's easy enough to say that it's all these forces that are conspiring to make America less healthy. But of course, that's never, ever truly the case. And if it was the case, then it certainly means that there must be no self-will on the part of the American public to be involved. Another interesting thing that doesn't come out in this are two facts that come from that old adage about following the money. So Mr. Means is the founder of a company called TrueMed. And TrueMed is a company that facilitates business-to-business interactions and will hook health benefit managers up with physicians that will sign off on them purchasing things like fitness clubs, saunas, cold plunges, supplements, anything for those health dollars. So he has an interest in here, but that seems to not really be his, his is a good interest, so it's okay because he's trying to get us more benefits. So I saw that. And the other real question I had is, I'm not sure why we're having this huge back and forth over the U.S. dietary guidelines. If you look at the academic literature, the American public follows maybe 50% of the time, 60% of the time. So it's not really a hard and fast commandment that we follow. It's guidelines are even, that's too strong. It's kind of some suggestions if you have some free moment. But if you dig down deeper into the U.S. guidelines, it becomes clear why people are so interested in what they are. Because the U.S. dietary guidelines form the basis of, are you ready for this one? The Food Thrift Program, or the Thrifty Food Program. And that program describes a market basket of foods that can be purchased. And that forms the basis for all the SNAP regulations and all the lunch meals and everything else. So the big fight over the U.S. dietary guidelines are because those dietary guidelines are then morphed one more time into the criteria for what the government will pay for. And that helps explain why all these different special interests are piling on to be there.
It's fascinating stuff, and I love that it typically comes down to just some fundamental economic concept. That's usually what this all comes down to is somebody wants a payday.
Yes.
Now, sometimes that's okay, right? Like a company that developed a vaccine that saves lives or an AIDS drug or whatever, they should be compensated for that because they've done a great service. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I think what we're seeing is what you're saying, right? This is a fight over rent seeking. Right.
Yeah.
This is people that are trying to get money from the government in one way or another. And I think that's what I find disingenuous, right? Is Casey and Callie means they get in front of the country and they say the dumbest things like, for every serving of ultra processed food you have, whatever that is defined as, no one agrees on it, your risk of early mortality goes up 18%. I'm no mathematician, but I'm pretty sure I would be long dead at this point. I'm 36 years old. I must have had, I don't know how many thousands of servings of, frozen pizza. I should not be alive, right? And that's the thing that bugs me is, we substitute a meaningful discussion where there are valid criticisms, and those all get thrown out, and instead we get to argue motives and intent. And the information, as I think you wanted to elaborate on, doesn't often matter.
No. And there's something to be said for moral indignation because it allows you to feel better about yourself and it doesn't cost anything. And so that makes it a great coin of the realm. It's not as if, if people really feel that big food is out to get them, go buy the food that they think is better. That's it. It's real easy. If they think big pharma is out to kill them, don't take the meds. It's okay.
Yeah, it's a good point as we wrap up here. A lot of their complaints were, the amount of sunlight that children get every day has declined precipitously, and the amount of steps people take is capped at 3,500. And, there's the corporations are waging war on our children's health. And I'm sitting here as a father of two young children, and I go, man, if only there were adults, specifically two, that can interpose in between children and these other influences out in the world, right? If only we could come up with some sort of a structure where you teach people about the world before they go out on their own, right? And it's like all of these people, and again, this goes to your primary point, which is that they all have an incentive to attack the food companies. And that's why they don't want to talk about something very simple like good parenting, because there's no money to be made in telling a single mother that maybe she needs to learn to make better choices for her kids, right? That will just get you shamed.
No. And I find it fascinating that the people that we've long associated with corporate interests are now seeking a new approach to science regulation, and which will be fascinating, because with the end of the Chevron decision, the Congress is going to actually have to say what we're going to have in the dietary guidelines, because we can't leave it up to regulatory science to impose Congress's will.
Yeah, there's interesting days ahead. It's late September as we record this. So the next few months are going to be entertaining, to say the least. Hopefully nothing catastrophic happens. But
rock and roll.
Yeah, man. Anyways, again, this is a very deep-seated issue. There's a lot of influences. But I'm grateful we have folks like Chuck who will step back and go, let's take a closer look at the incentives that are actually driving this discussion. So if you want to read Chuck's article, again, it's called Making America Healthy Again, Conflicted Interests. It's on our website, acsh.org. Go there, click the subscribe tab, punch in your email address. We'll send you all the stories we publish in an email. And then when you come to the show, you'll know what we're talking about. So I hope you take advantage of that. Thank you as always for joining us, and we will see you next time.